Cool. I like a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Shaka Dendy. I'm an artist, educator, musician, um, writer, thinker, maker.
Dope.
Yeah.
So we start our interviews with the first question. Are you hood grown? And if so, how does that influence your aesthetic?
Um, yeah, I was thinking about like what that means. And it's like, I feel like it's relative. Like I felt like I was, in the hood at times, and then I definitely, you know, there were things that sort of reversed that, or like people looked at me as if I were sort of some sort of hope or a beacon of hope or something. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, my surroundings coming into the work, I think that's apparent. Um, so in that sense of hood grown, of being kind of aware of where you come from and kind of bringing that with you in a sense. Yeah, yeah.
And we talked a little bit when we first met, but I know a little bit about where you grew up. So you were born here in Boston, and then lived and grew up in Florida, but I'm not sure which part of Florida. And then you came back here, correct?
Yeah, that's the
So,
gist of it.
okay. So what drove you back to Boston? Why did you want to launch your artistic career in the city rather than staying in Florida and continuing your work there or your life there?
Um, yeah, I probably wouldn't have the same work that I have now had I stayed in Florida.
Mhm.
So my family is like split across the East Coast, and so my father and his side are here, my mother and her side are in Florida. So I was born here, we all lived here, and then I went back to Florida to live there, and I would come back here like in the summers and winters. So I kind of grew up in both places, but primarily in Florida, and I went to school there. And then it was just kind of time for me to like get out. Like I enjoyed growing up there, and I like Florida, and I'm like, glad I was there, but I'm also glad I left at the time I did. And yeah, I think coming back to Boston, where I already had a home base, and like I wasn't completely new to it, but
Mhm.
I'm still coming at it in sort of a new space in my life. But coming back has definitely sort of informed, the things that I've gotten into, the sort of communities I've been around, and the people I've met. And so it wasn't much of a, deliberate choice to kind of start my career here. Um, I mean, in a sense, it was like I came here knowing I was going to go to graduate school and like start sort of that part. But yeah, I mean, it happened in Boston because that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And do you feel like just having that home base, you felt just more comfortable to at least express yourself as an artist? From what I understand of your background, you have an English degree, correct? And a graduate degree in film and media.
Yeah,
So what made you like, I don't know if it was the comfort of being at home that made you want to explore sculpture, but what made you
yeah.
go into sculpture?
Um, yeah, it was a roundabout journey. But the first part of that, so it's sort of like being here and feeling more home. I think that's related to like what I was getting at with the idea of hood grown is
Mhm.
like there was sort of that alienation in both places. And so there was ups and downs on both sides. So like I was in Boston and I sort of had a home base here and I was familiar with it, but coming to it in graduate school in my 20s, I had never been here as like an adult living here permanently, so I'd never been to any bars, so like I didn't know anything about any of that, so there's
Yeah.
like a whole side of it that I don't know.
That's how
But
it
I
was for
do.
me when I came back from college. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like I was an adult at all growing up here, and then like I was an adult in New York, and then I came back here, and I was like, I don't know where to go. Like,
Yeah, it's like I
I don't
don't
know where.
know anything. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, I grew up here, but now I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there was that some of alienation, and the same thing kind of applies to like I think growing up and like whether or not it was like a hood grown upbringing.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, so I did. I mean, I felt more comfortable just being in the city,
Mhm.
and probably my transition and like all the sort of things outside of your coursework and the overall like living in the city. I think was a lot easier for me just having history and experience here. Um, but yeah, how we got to sculpture was roundabout. It seems that way. Looking back on it, it makes sense to me now. I think everything that I've done, I've always been getting at this sort of like visual communication.
Mm.
Um, and I didn't always know what that looked like or what that was or what the possibilities were for that, just like expressively or as a career. And so how that has manifested has changed over time. And so it started with writing. I've always been a writer and liked writing. And so that was sort of going into, English degree and thinking writing, creative, and I minored in film. And so I was thinking I would write and learn about the visual medium, and I would ultimately write for television or write for movies or do some sort of communicative writing through a visual medium, which is what got me to go to film school. Kind of this idea of thinking I was going to write television. And but I kind of went further into like, since I was already in the film school curriculum, like what can I get out of it? And so I went further into like kind of video art, which got me into installation, and then we started building sculptures around the video and sorts of these things.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah, so it's related, and like there is a logic to it, but it
Mhm.
does, yeah.
I mean, like I'm a sculptor too, and I feel like I got there in a strange way too. So it's always good to ask different sculptors.
How did how did you get to that place, and what kind
Oh,
of sculpture do you make also?
I work with paper and clay when I sculpt.
Okay.
I don't work with found material the way that you do, and we'll get to that. But I was introduced to sculpture in college. Like in high school, they really didn't really, I don't know, teach it to us much because of being
Yeah.
in public school. They didn't really have space for it. But in college, I was introduced to it, and then it kind of was like, oh, this is everything to me. Like, drop everything else. Like, what's a painting? Like, I don't give a fuck about that anymore.
Yeah.
So it was like a very like quick switch for me. It was like, oh, now I get it. This is where my mind has been this whole
Yeah.
time, and I just didn't know because no one gave me the materials in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. My exposure to like contemporary art was like pretty much nothing up until like in college in my English program, and I was taking this like experimental literature course or something, and was taught by a professor who was a writer, and he directed music videos and was like into contemporary art and these things. And so I got into it from that way, like through sort of the English and like evaluating what is a text and what sort of like aesthetics and kind of looking at the meaning of things and whatnot. So I came into it from that space, and that just
Very
kind of
fine
like,
arty.
yeah, but I mean, it was all through like an English curriculum.
Hmm.
And then oddly enough, there used to be this platform called the Jogging. I don't know if you know. It was like a
No.
Tumblr blog a couple of years ago, and it's like sort of a satire on contemporary art aesthetics, but it's like this online submission thing where people would like submit stuff. And so I was like, it's like a it's sort of like if someone were to learn about American politics by just like looking through the Onion archives, of like it's kind of real but not really.
But not really.
Uh,
Got it. Cool.
yeah, so it was like that kind of informal internet joking
Hmm.
kind of entry point into contemporary art, which I think probably informed how I look at the landscape and combine it with writing. Like I think there's a connection there, kind of humor.
Oh yeah, for sure. So to get a little bit back on my questions, we went off on a little tangent.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. This is what I told you. It's a conversation.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
getting into it. So last summer you held the BCA Summer Public Visual Arts Artist Residency, where you
Yeah.
created the public sculpture, Monuments to Gesture of Incompleteness, 3 and 6. Can you talk about this work's connection to community service as well as your relationship to basketball and how you connected that all into the use or like the reuse or the repurposing of milk crates?
Yes.
The
That's
big
like, yeah, there's like
question.
a whole constellation of things in that. Um, Community service and basketball and repurposing of crates.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was my kind of first foray into public art and kind of first time really thinking about it. And so I think a lot of what I was doing through the project was trying to reconcile maybe some of the anxieties and like feelings I had around the project, and around having like this sort of institutional support of an individual and sort of, you know, being beholden to the public in a sense where I'm creating with the public in mind. So it felt very much like a service, is at least how I went into it. And so I was thinking of ways to try to remove myself as much as possible from the work, and sort of be a conduit to letting the community and the public make a thing. And so that's where I kind of focused more on the community service element and made that the actual focal point of the work. Because I'd started the idea thinking about the sculpture that I could make, and I was kind of fixated on that. And then I was in the studio and I made these big scale mock-ups of like the actual sculpture or what the thing could be. And I realized like that was not it. Like it was so incomplete. And so, I mean, the bulk of the actual work itself was the interactions and the community service and the exchanging and the conversations, which is why, and that's sort of the gesture of the project, the gesture of incompleteness. And so the sculptures are really just sort of the receipts of that. So that's why the sculptures are monuments to the gesture. So the sculptures are sort of a secondary kind of remainder of the actual work. But the basketball element came just like from my personal experiences in childhood. Like I played basketball as a kid, like most kids do. And just kind of like got out of it. But I came back to basketball kind of more thematically in my MFA program, working on my thesis project, which was around the basketball as more of a symbol of like personal identity. And I did this performance and installation and sculpture with basketball. And so it sort of set some of the groundwork for what I did in the public art project, but it was more so focusing on like my own personal history, singular identity. And so with the opportunity for the public art project, I was trying to think of a way to basically have that same conversation, less about me and more broadly and openly for, anyone that could identify with it, and provide something of tangible benefit, beyond just like hearing a story or me making a sculpture, but to actually try to like give things to people, something that's actually a benefit to people's life in the public. Even if it's just, a basketball is more of a gesture. Yeah.
Dope.
There was another part to the question.
I think you got to it all. The milk crates, the repurposing of milk crates.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get to materials in a second.
True.
Okay. Yeah. One more question. Let's go to the next question. We're good.
Yeah.
I think you answered it. So I know that you're in this band, hip hop. I don't know how to fully describe it. You guys I really like your music. I'll say that. You work with Hassan, who I have known in different ways through his modeling and things like that, and the people that he's worked with. But how does your music influence your visual art, if at all, and vice versa? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, I'd say this thing, it's about sort of different languages. And like I have kind of these central ideas and things I'm trying to explore through like my entire practice. And so through different languages, you can kind of, you use different vocabulary and you can get to more specific ideas that you maybe can't do in something else. And so for me, it's about what medium will allow me to like most directly kind of get the idea across, or more specifically kind of be able to combine certain elements, and just use certain mediums to certain effects. So like there are things that you can do with writing that you can't do with a sculpture, but there's things you can do with sculpture that you can't do with video. And so it's just sort of bouncing around, and like I think eventually through these and some sort of combination of them all, like I don't know, get closer to some sort of central answer somewhere. But a lot of, I think it's more, I mean, there's like the writing element of the communication, which is obviously in songwriting. And then a lot of times for the titles of my pieces will be sort of their own little lyrical kind of counterpoint to the sculptures. And so sometimes it's just fun to like illustrate, with a sculpture and a name, you can illustrate the same idea on a couple of different levels, like how you name it, how you spell it, what the objects are and how the words kind of relate to the signifiers and things. And so it's just kind of finding those little nuances and what you can do and kind of dial in to get the most like specific and clear, or the most broad and open kind of, expression of whatever you're trying to get across.
Do you ever find that you're trying to use the same idea and then use different mediums to try to portray the idea and test which works best? Or does that,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, that's usually how they start. And I have like these ideas that I've been thinking about that are like just little phrases or kind of word sketch ideas. And I'm like, damn, this could be,
Is it
if
a
I had
song? Is it a sculpture?
yeah, I'm like, is it a song? Do I have like $30,000 to make it a big sculpture? Like,
Mhm.
yeah, but then there's even like sculptures that I've made that have those sort of names that have sort of settled into the sculpture and I'm able to move past it beyond thinking about like, could it be a lyric or
Mm,
something? But yeah, I'm definitely like sitting with a couple of those things now, and then it's just about what's like the maximum execution, or can I just try it now one way to get it across? Like
mhm.
there's an immediacy to making music, which is one of the reasons that's sort of where my writing has landed now. Like I went the immediacy of writing music and writing for yourself versus like all the steps and people and the input to writing a screenplay or like a script for TV, is one thing that pushed me into music. But that immediacy is like a good way to just sort of rapidly like test out ideas.
Well, and also being in your music, I mean, Camp Blood is a group, so there's two of you,
Yeah.
right, that work together. But when you're working on your sculptures, you're working alone primarily. So do you find that having a partner to kind of bounce ideas off of expands on your visual thinking as well? Or do you like to be like the isolated artist thinker and think alone when it comes to your visual work?
Um, no, I mean, I don't even know how much I believe in that model of artistry. Um, but with Camp Blood, I mean, there we have sort of like a mission statement in a sense, which is
Mhm.
nice to have, and that, like we know what we want to do and sort of the direction that we want to go, and so we're able to come up with ideas and bounce them back and forth in that direction. And it's nice to work within constraints like that. Like I like sometimes having um, just some sort of confinement to work in to then sort of explore, because there's something that can be like daunting about just complete open freedom of like
Mhm.
you can do anything and so you can't do anything. um, and a lot of like the other kind of personal music and stuff that I make, um, kind of get some of that stuff out where I can be like more indulgent with myself or just kind of do whatever I want to do.
Mm.
Um, where with Camp Blood, it's still very expressive and free, but there's a certain aesthetic and kind of things that we're aiming for, so it makes it easier to be focused on that. But yeah, and then those things do sort of line up, I think, thematically with like my own visual art stuff.
Mm.
um, and that even like, I mean, I work alone in the sense that like I make my ideas and my works, but the ideas, they don't come from me just like sitting in a room all day long. Like it's
Right.
out and sort of having conversations and seeing how people feel about ideas, just different things like that.
Dope. So let's get into your relationship with materials because I'm very
Yeah.
curious. So how do you choose the objects you use? How do you think about the color palette when you don't necessarily alter the colors of the objects you're choosing for your sculpture? But it seems like you always have a plan with color, even though there's like you have no control over it. You're choosing
Yeah.
rather than like, yeah, you can't do anything about what the object already has on it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, then you could ask whether that choice is the control,
Mhm.
like what you do choose to incorporate. But I mean, I'm interested in found objects for like a number of reasons, like economic, practical, philosophical, art history. Um, so there's a lot of reasons. I think one is just I mean, it sort of is tied into like how like my sort of philosophy of what I think art even is, and I feel like it's the objects and things that we make aren't the art. The art is the experience that a person has with the thing, and so what we make is the trigger for that. And sort of our style and the things we want to talk about can sort of direct that trigger to have a viewer have a more controlled sort of experience. But the art is sort of the experience that you have with the thing. And so because of that, I'm not super interested in like making things necessarily. I'm interested in having people have experiences that hopefully make them think and kind of stretch a little bit in that sense. And so if things already exist in the world, I don't feel the need to just make more things. And so I think it's more impactful to sort of change the way someone looks at something that's already familiar, and to sort of flex that looking muscle that will then allow that person to be able to just kind of see more art already out in the world. I'm a big proponent that like everything that does exist already exists and has always existed. And so like I don't really feel the need to like make new things. I'm more interested in just rearranging what's already around. And so certain objects, I mean, I think about the object on a lot of different levels, and certain ones work for specific kinds of things, and ideas that I have around objects themselves and manufacturing and production. It tends to be these sort of artificial, there's a lot of like black plastic things, sort of really cheap common materials. But I think that's just sort of the texture of the world around me and where I'm at. So it's just reflective of what sort of is around. And obviously there is like some control in terms of like the colors and what things I'm bringing into it. But those are, those are choices that I make from what's available. I do work with black a lot. So that's just like another thing that'll be there. And so things like milk crates, lend themselves well to that. But I also work with very colorful, bright milk crates as well, when appropriate.
Those neon ones. I was like, where do you find those? I've never seen those in stores. But yeah, I think they were really cool to see them together, like the normal milk crates versus the fancy ones. Where'd you get fancy milk crates? So to talk about your piece, Picking Cotton, it's a piece that you have of a actual pick, of a hair pick, and it's placed in cotton. In addition, it seems like there is some hair mixed into the cotton. Is that your own hair?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was a side question. But what is the narrative you're trying to create around Black art? And do you see your work as political or celebratory around Blackness? Or it could be both.
You see my eyes. I was that was like just thinking about sort of creating a narrative. I don't think that I'm trying to create a narrative around Black art, at least not right now. I think right now I'm interested in trying to figure out like what it actually is and kind of pinpointing Blackness, and doing so through Blackness, and doing so through kind of exploring like the artifacts or the residue kind of around it. Sort of like you would look at like a black hole. It's like you can't actually see the black hole, but you can see the way that things around it move and bend. So I'm trying to look at Blackness through the things that are sort of around it or come out of it. And which it may sound kind of simple, but it's actually like very deep for me. And like, it's hard to pinpoint what it is. One thing that I've like kind of found, I didn't find it, but one thing that's I think a big sort of beacon is hair in general, and hair culture and aesthetics and history. And so exploring that kind of through Picking Cotton, and using these objects again that are already around and like have their own history and are kind of ubiquitous in a sense, and just repurposing them to kind of redirect someone's mind, and think about something. So I'm interested in kind of figuring out how Blackness functions, maybe, like in sort of as an American, as a specifically like American invention, because Blackness didn't start until Africans got to America and we sort of constructed this thing around it. So I'm interested in like that moment of transformation and how that has had impacts, through now, and it's still such a weird amorphous thing. Like the idea that someone could have a black card revoked, or like someone could like not be black but like be black or be at the cookout, like these sort
Mhm.
of weird fluid things, like how I'm trying to figure out what it actually is,
Right.
and how it works. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like being political or celebratory, um I don't know, I struggle with this idea of like political work or just things being political. 'Cause it feels like, or at least the way that I look at it is like politics is never the thing. It's sort of how we interface with the thing.
Mm.
So the work isn't politics, but if you want to sort of look at it through a political lens, or if you want to think about it in those terms, then it can become political. Um, and some things are, more things like sort of these ideas around blackness or economy, these things that aren't necessarily real, but they're tied into so many of our systems that they have like these real effects and develop a sense of realness. Always kind of around the thing. Connection's unstable. Did I disappear? You
You,
froze.
you were always there. You just
Okay.
froze.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I understand that my work could be read as political just because of the nature and the climate of like our world and country,
Mhm.
but I don't necessarily have any, ambitions to make political work. I feel relatively apolitical.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
So,
I don't know if
go
it's
on.
celebratory either. I don't
Okay.
know. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be either. I do. Yeah, that works too.
Yeah.
It's just a statement.
Yeah.
Go. So I was able to see your work 10 piece at Distillery Gallery a couple months ago when we were able to be out in the world. This work had the additional element of smell, which I
Yeah.
found was really nice. What was the process of frying 5 pairs of Adidas top 10s? And can you talk about the contrast and the connection to streetwear and soul food?
Yeah. The process was pretty simple, actually. um, it was just like frying chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was another thing where like the process was sort of part of the work, and the
Mm-hmm.
work serves as kind of the document of that, which is something that I see happens a lot in my work, like video work or sculptural anything. But the idea, I mean, I was thinking about it in terms of like ritual and developing rituals. And so the preparation of the food
Mm.
is the ritual. And so the cooking of it was the actual ritual of the work. And when I started doing it, it like didn't really stick to the shoe I wanted, like the way I wanted it
Mhm.
to. And so I had to figure out like the right battering ratio and ingredients and timing of everything to get it to be like the right sort of aesthetic, crispy look.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my friends about it because I bought like a whole like an outdoor fryer setup. And my friend has like a house in Cambridge, so I was using their backyard to do it. And we were talking about different ways to like get the breading right and everything. And they mentioned like maybe breadcrumbs or like a panko kind of deal or something.
That's not black.
Exactly,
That's not the
exactly,
black way to fry. Like,
exactly. Yeah, like that's where I came to. I was like, it's more important for me to like do this the way that Black people actually do this and
mhm.
let it look like what it looks like than it is to like dress up the process, something like that.
Right.
And so yeah, it was oil, it was flour, it was red pepper and Cajun seasoning,
That's
some
the
salt,
same thing.
pepper. Yeah.
How was the like? How was the? How did it preserve? How long did it last? Like, did it fall apart? Like, did it flake?
Um,
How did that go?
these are questions I honestly don't have answers to.
Oh, because you haven't seen it. It's still there.
No, yeah, the
Yeah.
last time I saw it was when you saw it.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, I haven't been back in the gallery and like I don't know when. Yeah, so
Oh,
preservation, yeah, I have no idea. It probably doesn't smell great in there
Mhm.
now. When
I
I
wonder if
was
any critters
installing it,
came.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking like there's no actual meat in it. Like it's just the
Yeah,
breading and frying. So
but
I
they
don't
like fries.
think, yeah, like I don't think it should like mildew and decompose in the same way that like
Mm-mm.
chicken would.
Yeah.
But it was definitely dripping grease and like had puddles of grease and like
Mm.
But when I was installing it, like a couple of days before the show, it had such a fresh smell of fried chicken. It was such a delightful thing to be able to do in that sort of space. There's like a grease streak on the wall, which it looks like it's like the effect when someone with like a greasy Jerry curl gets you like leave the grease puddle. There's like one of those on the wall.
Nice.
Which, yeah. So for as far as like European white wall aesthetics of the gallery, there's
busting out, just really
fried chicken grease.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I know that we've been trying to find a time to speak, and it's great that Zoom allows us that. My last question for you is, what's next for you in your work, and where can the people find your work?
You can find one piece of my work in the Distillery Gallery. Indefinitely.
Get in. You can just bust yourself there.
Bring it out for me, actually. Yeah. Next for me, I'm working on another public art project that was obviously thrown off the rails by coronavirus. But kind of reassessing how to engage the public in these sorts of things. So it's still on. That'll probably be like next fall, summer, next year. Some more musical content releases. Boston Calling was canceled, the MFA was canceled, all these cool shows and stuff. So no cool shows, but some more cool content, definitely. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Shaka Dendy, on Camp Blood on Instagram, everywhere. CMPBLD, it's like us everywhere. Yeah.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a good time.